Uncovering a medical
moment.
condition that I was actually born with, and uncovering it in my early 30s was already pretty devastating enough. But then I was told that quitting drinking just altogether would just be beneficial to my health. But making that change changed a path on my life path, changed the path of my life in a way that I really didn't expect it to be so monumental to get to where I'm at today now, 7 years later. So it really shifted most major areas of my life for the better.
In a good way.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Larry Burchett, and as I see every week in the ER, life can change in a moment. Here on this show, we tell the stories that matter most and how afterwards our lives are never the same. We have an incredible guest for you today, Dr. Amie Harwick, PhD,
MFT,
marriage and family therapist,
yeah.
and a sex therapist.
Yes.
This is going to be an incredible show.
Thank
you
having
for
me.
being here. I'm really excited you're here. I'm really curious about your moment.
Mm-hmm.
Can we start with that?
Sure. I feel like I've had a lot of moments in my life, and the one that I would like to share, I guess, would be quitting drinking. I was actually suffering from a health issue, and I was told that quitting alcohol would be a really positive thing for my general health. So I quit drinking, and I would never have considered myself an alcoholic, but making that life change, which was seemingly small at the time, completely changed how I engaged socially, how I engaged in relationships, with friends around me, and I replaced a lot of my behaviors with healthier ones. Instead of meeting friends at bars, I went to cafes. Instead of catching up over a drink, catching up over a hike. And now it's been over 7 years, and it's completely changed the direction of my life. So I would say that that's really the moment. Making that change was the moment that really made a huge impact on how I engage in the world around me.
This is really interesting. We've had somebody come on the show and talk about being an alcoholic and then kind of the moment that led her to stop drinking.
Yeah.
I think this one's interesting. You're noting all of these benefits, but you're not. You're saying, no, I wasn't really an alcoholic, but all of these good things came from it.
Right. I mean, I put my foot in my mouth a few times. Maybe I stumbled here and there, but I was not needing alcohol every day. I would not define myself by definition an alcoholic. But I had a health issue that was also something that changed some directions for me, that caused me to change some things I was living through at the time, something I was born with. And so I didn't find out until I was in my early 30s that I had to make some changes that were important for me. And now I'm healthy, I'm great, but changing that ended up changing a lot of directions and the partners that I've chosen after that. So now not drinking, it changes how I would date or interact in relationships, how I engage sexually. So all of these things really changed by making that particular change.
So I'm curious, for what you can tell us about what was going on with you at the time in your life, and where were you, and then kind of a compare and contrast.
Sure.
Your life with alcohol and without.
At the time, I would say I dated a lot of people that were heavy drinkers and would be at bars with them quite a bit.
You're like late 20s?
At this time, yeah.
Years after college?
Late 20s, yeah. Throughout my 20s, yeah. Okay. But overall, too, just having like dehydration or hangovers, things like that would happen occasionally. Being around people that wanted to be in alcohol environments. So now that's just not part of my life. I've not had a hangover or been tired because I was up so late at a bar. Most of the things that I do socially typically require me or allow me to be home by midnight. So my sleep is just better. So it just kind of directly and then indirectly affected a lot of things in my life. So it's kind of one of the best decisions I ever made.
It's like eliminating all of these negative consequences that come from too much alcohol.
Or even being in environments where that's a motivator. So like I went to an art gallery the other night and all they had was alcohol, and I thought, why don't they have coffee or ice cream? So I left for a little bit and went to a cafe and had some interesting conversations with people at a cafe and came back to the art gallery when there was a performance starting that I wanted to see.
I don't know if you felt alone or different or whatever.
Sure.
That
like
went
isolated. The relationship I was in, the person was a drinker, so that changed the relationship dynamic and ultimately led to the end of our relationship. So yeah, I felt definitely isolated because all my friends drank at the time. They would go out to bars, and that's what changed the people I would hang around.
So you make this decision for your health, not alcoholism, to stop drinking. And initially, it was probably really hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Socially, how long was it tough?
I would say the first year it was really tough because I was restructuring so much of my environment. So it was constantly making changes and becoming aware of what role that actually played in my lifestyle, in my day-to-day functioning, in the people I was attracted to, both platonically and romantically. But after that, it was not that difficult anymore. Also, it's very common in our culture to go out and like hold a drink. So for a while, I would just hold a drink so people didn't bug me about drinking, and so I wouldn't have to say to them, well, I had this medical condition and I decided to quit. It's just too annoying. So, and I also don't like holding drinks just because why? Like, it's cold, you're out with friends, people are bumping into you. It's just actually not very convenient. So it took me about a year, and then I'm like, no, I don't want to hold a soda water just so you have the illusion I'm participating in your drinking activity. But I do drink a lot of coffee now, so I did replace it. So,
pseudo addiction.
Yeah, I actually drink a lot of coffee. So
how much are we talking per day?
No, not that much. Like 1 or 2 a day.
Oh,
but there have been times when I was in graduate school.
I didn't know if you're like a 10 plus coffee kind of guy.
In graduate school, I was. So there was a time when I was working towards my licensure. A lot of people don't know that therapists, you need 3,000 hours of interning before you get licensed, and that's after your master's degree. So at that time, you're not making a living off of being a therapist, even though you were seeing clients.
That's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
How long does that take?
It took me 5 years because I did it in private practice.
Wow.
If you worked at a mental health agency, you get them a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But I wanted to build up experience in the way that I was planning on living and working after getting licensed. And essentially, I just built myself a business. And one day, my license was valid, and there I have a business and clients. So
I won't, there's a lot of things I want to get into. You're a sex therapist, a marriage family therapist. I'm kind of interested in how those go together. We've got the book, The New Sex Bible for Women. I've looked in it. It's intriguing, I'll say that. The guys here think it's intriguing as well. But let me go back a minute. I have a couple. So when you stopped drinking, what percent of your friendships ended or changed? Like half?
A few ended. Some shifted or changed. I would say like at least half. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the time, I was finishing? I think I was finishing graduate school. So I was still working. I worked as a performer before. I was a professional dancer. I ate fire. I worked at circuses. I've done...
What?
Yeah, I've even been a clown. Maybe twice I've been a clown. So I did all these random LA jobs. This is actually pretty common in LA though. I bartended. I was a sober bartender just to get through school at the time. And so a lot of my friends were people also living this lifestyle, whether they were going to school and doing all these side jobs or they were just artists.
So you're kind of a performer.
I had been, yeah.
Where did that come from?
I think that I like circus arts, and I like the art of movement, so that was always interesting for me. And also I needed to do random things to get through school, and that sounded a lot better than a retail job, so I enjoyed it.
Good for you.
Yeah, it was very fulfilling.
Tell me the ins and outs about eating fire.
Well, pretty much you just put a torch in your mouth and you slowly extinguish it. There's really no trick to it.
Okay. The ER doctor in me is going to pause right now and say, do not do that at home.
Don't do that at home. I was trained by professionals, and there's safety mechanisms that all fire eaters or all fire performers have, which is carrying Duvetine, which is a fire retardant cloth.
Okay.
I would have a fire extinguisher and a person designated as a fire safety person at any performance or job that I would have. But pretty much you use camping fuel, which is
like lighter fuel?
Coleman's. No, it's Coleman's camping fuel.
Camping fuel.
You get it at a hardware store.
Okay.
And it's because it doesn't burn dark; it burns clear.
Okay.
And that's pretty much it. So when you
do that.
Sorry.
Fucking thing did this last time too.
I'll show you right here. Why do you have a
technical
hatchet?
Difficulty.
What's going on there?
This was okay. This was a very early part of the set that it's actually a real fireplace.
That doesn't make sense.
We didn't have anything to put in the beginning, and so that we randomly put the hatchet on the. You're right.
That's not a good idea.
You're right. It shouldn't be here. Okay. All right. Okay. Back to you eating fire. So,
Okay.
what a disaster. Okay, so wait a minute. So, what's the secret to eating fire? I mean, like, if I was going to do this, like, I don't know, after the show and I didn't want to get burned. So I get camping fluid and I put it on what? A kebab, and I light it on fire, and I
Looks
just
like a kebab. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
and then like you put it in your mouth and it just goes out because it's
Well,
magic, or what's the
when
deal?
you're putting it in your mouth, the flame is going upwards. So the majority of the flame is actually not in your mouth. So it's very visibly nice to look at, but actually all that fire is not in your mouth. And when you slowly close your mouth around it, it restricts the oxygen, making it very easy to just give a little harder breath, and that will extinguish it.
It just goes out.
Yeah, but it is actually in your mouth, and there is actually camping fuel there. You just know the skill. Don't breathe in. One time I hiccuped. Bad idea.
Don't do this. Don't anybody do this. And sue
Yeah.
me. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I did all these random jobs and was around a lot of artists and performers for a good period of time. So, naturally, I think that gravitates a lot of eccentric types of people, and people were drinking a lot, and they were, having a good time, enjoying life. So my circle really changed. And now I hang out with a lot of people that are sober, either because of addiction issues or it's just like their choice. It's so much more comfortable to not have to say, oh, do you have to have like that fourth martini while we're having dinner? Are you sober right now? Like, it's just so much in our culture that hanging out around people that just don't drink.
So cultural.
Yeah, so much more comfortable. But big change.
So, okay, you mentioned this a couple times. You said the kind of men that you dated changed too. I'm curious about that.
You assumed men. But I do date men, yeah.
I don't think you said a gender pronoun in there
I
somewhere.
don't know. I think I was dating a man at the
We'll
time.
have to
that I
look
was
at the tape.
Yeah.
I didn't pull that out of nowhere.
Okay. Yeah, what did you say? The men that I was dating what?
You were kind of referencing how somebody you were dating at the time was drinking a lot, and just when you cut that out, you were attracted to a different kind of person.
Yeah, when I quit drinking, I had told the partner that I had at the time, and he would still proceed to bring like a six-pack over when he knew I was abstaining and wanted to sit on my couch next to me and just drink beer and watch a movie, and I thought that was quite inconsiderate.
Yeah.
And I still see that now if I'm going on a couple dates with somebody that, if people want to have a drink or so, that's okay, but going out of their way to drink more than a drink that would be common with dinner, I feel like is pretty inconsiderate when the other person isn't on that same level.
Okay, so that's kind of a rule. So for folks out there, if they're dating somebody who doesn't drink, you said like, a drink or two is okay, but then like, where do you get uncomfortable or where do you feel
If
offended?
somebody's intoxicated, if you are visibly showing signs of intoxication around a person who's not intoxicated and you're trying to show your best side to this person because you're on a date, it's probably just not a good idea to do that. And that's some common sense. So
I feel like that's a good idea, whether you're sober or not, that maybe that's not the best
You'd
approach.
be surprised. So that really just changed how I viewed that person, and just moving forward with dating, I typically will gravitate towards people that drink minimally or not at all.
Do you think that that's helped you find better partners?
Yeah, and also just kind of taking more time out without that substance to explore my own needs and wants, and really know that that's going to be a big component of what would match with me romantically.
So what kind of things, like if you talk about kind of a cultural social life, which includes going to bars and drinking and so forth, like when you eliminated that, you mentioned, let's go on a hike. Like, so what things do you do now?
Right.
How did that change?
So it changed how I engage with people socially, and it was a great experience for me in that when I work with clients, I have clients that whether they're trying to get sober or they're just trying to find other things to do besides nightlife that they don't feel works for them anymore. That happens with a lot of people as you grow and change, that it's just not attractive to be in like a nightlife environment. So I would hike more. I've always exercised a lot. Prior to being a therapist, I was in fitness, so that's always been part of my life. Just really participating in art communities. I go to a lot of art galleries or performance shows. And instead of going out to a bar afterwards or going to a late night diner, I typically go home. I love being home before midnight, so I like getting a lot of sleep and getting up early and exercising. So it's really made that life much more attainable that I was looking for.
To emphasize how great sleep is and how good you feel the next day, it's so true, but I feel like such a grandpa in saying it, you know.
No,
Sleep
but
matters to me.
you know,
It
as a
matters
medical
now.
professional, right? And when I
Yeah.
see a new client in my intake sessions with my clients, before I go through anything else, let's say they come in and there's a sexual dysfunction or there's a mood disorder that seems to be present, I'll ask about their eating, sleeping, head injuries, illnesses, other things that could affect their psychology before I'm going to go into other things. So one of those things is sleep. If somebody is sleep deprived and their symptoms, their bipolar symptoms are being more aggravated, that could easily be because of sleep deprivation.
Totally.
Yeah.
This nice overlap of kind of medical and mental health stuff, sleeping.
Absolutely. So many overlaps there.
So I want to get into the book and these topics.
Cool.
You're a marriage family therapist, and a sex therapist.
Yes.
Why both? How did you get into doing both of those?
Well, MFT, or marriage and family therapist, is a license. So to practice with clients, a therapist you might see would either be an MSW, which is a master's in social work, an MFT, which is typically a master's in clinical psychology with a license on marriage and family therapy.
Okay.
And they differ just a little bit. The MSW program looks at more of a macro approach, whereas the MFT program looks at a more individual clinical approach.
Yeah.
If you have a licensed psychologist, that's just their license is on their PhD or on their PsyD. So it's just where the license is held. So it's essentially a license that gives somebody the legal ability to work with dyads, couples, groups like families, individuals. So it's an umbrella term that says I can work with all of these types of groupings of people, but whether or not you do is up to you. Most MFTs work with individuals. So
This I didn't know that. That's really helpful.
yeah, I don't work with
So,
families or children.
MFT is the umbrella license. Are there other, this is kind of a stupid question, but are there other kind of therapists that are not MFTs?
Typically, a therapist is in the master's in social work, MFT, marriage and family therapist,
Yeah.
a PsyD, a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
Sometimes a psychiatrist can do therapy, but those are the who can do therapy legally.
Legally, it falls under
Legally.
MFT.
MFT, MSW, PsyD,
Okay, those are
or
different
psychiatrist.
designations.
Yeah, so a
Okay.
psychiatrist is the medical doctor. So people will ask me, oh, you have doctor in front of your name, do you prescribe medication? And I don't. My master's or my PhD is in, it's a PhD of philosophy of human sexuality. So my PhD just says that I've done lots of additional study in the philosophy of human sexuality, the idea of human sexuality. It's not clinical or psychological. Whereas I believe you've had other guests on that were licensed psychologists, which means that their PhD was attached to their license. My master's degree is attached to a license.
Your master's is in?
Clinical psychology.
Okay, so that was kind of my question was clinical psychology master's, and then, so this is my question is, what got you into clinical psychology? And then why'd you do a PhD in sexuality?
So psychology has always been interesting to me. I think most people are very interested in psychology. That's why we like to watch true crime, and we're interested in human behavior. As people, we seek relationships, and part of relationship building and attachment is the exploration of the other and the relation to the other to yourself. So of course I was always interested in that, as many people are. I initially was very much interested in forensic psychology, but I didn't think that's
The
a direct...
criminally ill?
Yeah, I think that it's fascinating. But after doing some research in the field and meeting some people that worked in that area, I felt like I didn't know if that was going to be enjoyable and sustainable for a lifetime. So I wanted to be a therapist and specialize in sexuality to do more of a sex positive approach. So I want to help people and build them up and build self-esteem and work on, help people work on self-acceptance and education. So also doing sex education and advocate work. So I felt like that was going to be a lot more satisfying. But psychology in general has always been quite interesting to me since I was an adolescent. And so I kind of did exactly what I wanted to do when I was, a teenager. As a kid, I wanted to be a therapist. So check, I did that. So
What took you from that next step of therapist to sex therapist?
So I had always been interested in sexuality, gender and identity issues, women's psychology and feminist psychology. When I was a teenager, I was kind of like a raging feminist. In Pennsylvania, where I grew up, I had bumper stickers all over my car, like separate church and state, reproductive rights, and my car would get keyed and people would yell at me.
Where in Pennsylvania?
Outside of Philadelphia. It's very conservative.
Like a
Suburb
of Philly.
Suburb, yeah, yeah. So that was always an interest of mine. And as a sex therapist, a lot of the things that I work with are very much related to people's gender identities, sexual orientation, and how that impacts relationships around them. So a common misconception is that sex therapy is, working with sex addiction and all these things, in which a lot of what I do is just really working with people on understanding their bodies and accepting themselves. So because in a master's program for MFT, clinical psychology, I believe an MSW program, and also for the PsyD program, it's all just one unit of sex education.
Not much.
Not much. And especially if you're looking at a marriage and family therapist and MFT license, where somebody might go out and just work with couples or work with family dynamics. And we all know that people either have sex or don't have sex, and each of those things can be a problem in their relationships, that having some understanding of sexuality would be extremely important for the professionals working in that field, and it's just not provided. So for you to be more confident.
That's surprising to hear that. I think I would assume that would be more than one credit.
One would assume.
That kind of training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I decided that I think it was important for me to seek additional training and education to call yourself an expert in any type of specialty as a therapist based on our licensure. You have to have additional education, experience, and training in whatever that is. And it doesn't really name how much of those things to consider yourself an expert, but as long as you kind of have some of those things, you can be an expert in whatever that area is. So I took that upon myself. I got my PhD in human sexuality. My interning I did, getting my 3,000 hours, were under 2 separate sex therapists that really make a big difference in the community. Very outspoken, do media, do a lot of volunteer and advocate work. So I took, I was around that for about 5 years very actively. And then I speak, I write, I get really involved with what I do, including coming on podcasts and videos and things like that.
Coming on the show.
Educating other people about that. So because there was a lack of education, I wanted to be in the position to provide more of that service to the clients I have. And I also go back to where I got my master's, and I often do in-services at Pepperdine to their students about what you might expect when a client brings up something regarding sexuality. Because people feel uncomfortable and not prepared as students going into this field because they just aren't given the skills they need.
There's a lot of things that I want to ask you about.
Okay.
Let's talk about experts in sexuality that may not have the education, the credentials, maybe they're pushing it a little bit on social media. What are some common myths or common things you see out there and you're like, this is so not true? Here's the reality.
About sexuality?
Sexuality, all of your expertise in that.
Not that I see things that aren't true, but when you mention social media and like experts or pseudo-experts out there, because there's so many now. There's so much accessibility now to accurate information and also inaccurate information. I just see a lot of posting, a lot of experts or pseudo-experts putting things out there about people self-diagnosing psychological disorders such as narcissism and codependency and these things that people want to use that as a label then to market a service, a book, an idea. But I think we need to be really cautious on how we throw around terms like that. So easy to say, the narcissist that you're dating or, are you codependent? But, I think there's a lot of this misinformation that creates not only fear in individuals, but the desire to blame others for what they perceive others to be based on posts they read on Instagram. So I think we need to be really cautious on what we follow and what we expose ourselves to. And in general, not just with expert sexuality and mental health, but in general with how we engage in media and social media.
It brings to mind a little bit to me, of Dr. Google and people kind of Googling their symptoms, coming up with a diagnosis, and then they come in and talk to me, and I'm like, I understand why you're worried about this. Like, you don't have it. That's not what it is. I can see similarly on social media, seeing various things or following Instagram and feeling like you have X, Y, and Z or somebody else does, when really it's a different experience to get a professional and a therapist that knows what they're talking about.
If somebody comes in and says, I think I have bipolar, at that point would go through the diagnostic criteria and talk about, well, do you feel like you meet this criteria? There's a pretty clear criteria for diagnosing people as a therapist based on the DSM-5.
Yeah.
And so if somebody wants to talk about that, we can talk about it. Typically, when people bring things up like that, they don't meet the criteria, and then we talk about maybe their anxiety, that they have these thoughts, because that's more of an anxious thought.
Yeah.
When I have clients that bring up Googling medical issues and they come in and say, I'm convinced I've got cancer, I'm dying because I had this rash on my arm. We talk about also how we engage in compulsive searching and Googling. This is definitely not a problem that was happening before we could Google things like this. You know,
Yeah,
I don't
no
know
kidding.
if people were always pulling out their Encyclopedia Britannicas and or whatever.
I think the anxiety they would come in a different way. Oh, my friend got a fever and has this horrible thing. I think I have it now. You know, they grab onto something else, even if it isn't right there at their fingertips. Okay, so I'm really curious in your practice. I'm thinking women and men. Like, what are some of the common sex problems? I don't know, dysfunction or whatever that people come in with.
Well, I do see dysfunctions and sexual problems, but the majority of clients that come into me to talk about sexual issues or sexual lifestyle related things, which are about half the clients I see, are typically coming in because they're part of a community that's stigmatized and marginalized, and they want to be able to either talk about how that affects them or say, you know what, I'm in a poly relationship, but I actually had a mother that passed away and I want to work on my grief in a space where somebody's not going to constantly be bringing up, well, your problem is that you have 2 girlfriends, or whatever it might be. So I do specialize in working with populations that are stigmatized and marginalized, if that they want to talk about that as a part of their presenting problem, or if that's just a part of their life and they know that coming to me, that's not going to be something that we dwell on as problematic.
So give me some examples of that.
I work with sex workers and performers in the adult industry. It's very difficult for people that work in sex work to connect to mental health services that understand and empathize with that. I work with a nonprofit called Pineapple Support that provides that subsidized, lower cost, lower range fee for them, so they connect to the nonprofit who brings them to me. So those are specifically adult performers. And then the sex workers I work with are just a whole range of different type of sex work.
Sex work and perform like porn stars or prostitutes?
Well, you might want to say porn stars, but right now, because the adult industry has changed so much, there's not really porn stars the way there was in like the 90s. So now a lot of people are making their own content, and maybe they're not as popular or famous like, let's say, Jenna Jameson was in the 90s. But now what's happening is, instead of having somebody like an agent or even like a pimp type character guide your career and say, oh, I made you and I own all your content, a lot of people are now making their own content in their bedrooms, loading it on Pornhub, and they get money when people view them or buy clips. So what you're seeing is a lot of people, a lot of younger people especially, that they're their own bosses, which is great if they're doing it because they want to. They're their own boss. There's a lot of benefits to this, but there's also a lot of still social isolation because of the career path they've chosen, stigmatizing. Also with the SESTA and FOSTA laws, Instagram and other accounts are getting taken down. So is it legal? Is it not legal? There's all this gray area that's affecting people's incomes, which can be very frustrating. Typically the sex workers that I work with, and when I say sex work, I'm talking about the adult performers, I'm talking about webcam performers, escorts of all ranges. Typically, it's managing stress and anxiety related to changing laws, telling family members, more about how others are engaging with them, how to set boundaries.
So I'll just kind of be me and however ignorant I appear, but I'm wondering, like, oh, this kind of work, like, how does that affect someone? And what I'm hearing you say is a lot of the challenges they have are, okay, laws are changing, or or this may affect their income, there's stress related to that. There's the social kind of, you said isolation.
Well, if you're a webcam performer, you're in your room or wherever you want to have your laptop, and you're on camera with people that are then tipping you through a tipping mechanism. So then, if you know,
it's
you
not
could
real human contact.
Not real human contact, and also it's like a chat room. So you'll have just anybody go on there and they call them names, derogatory terms. So you're just in your bedroom all day and these guys are spitting out, or people, who knows, male or female, are spitting out these terms that, you can let that bounce off of you, but after a while it gets to you.
Yeah.
Right, or bank accounts get shut down. Oh, your bank account is related to your very legal webcam business, but us as a bank, we don't advocate for adult industry things. I actually have a really close friend who has a burlesque group. They wear clothes, it's non-nude, they perform at Harvell's here in Santa Monica.
Okay.
They're called Little Miss Nasty, and they're rock and roll burlesque. It's a great show, good friends of mine. And their bank account was denied because it's burlesque, because it is too sexual for the bank. So they had this whole bank started, their account, got this business. My friend got her LLC, really excited, and the bank shut them down. And they're just a burlesque group.
Seems a bit much.
Right, exactly. So, and that's just a burlesque group. Imagine if you are a nude performer or a webcam performer or a porn person, how vulnerable your life is when bank accounts are getting shut down, and also with boundaries.
So you're saying they come in with kind of all of these stresses and anxiety related to this social stuff of the chosen career path.
Or not. Or they're like, you know what, my job is that I'm a sex worker, but, I have a difficult relationship with my boyfriend that's totally not related to sex work that I do.
Yeah.
Or, I have a parent who's an addict and I'm trying to manage and navigate those boundaries. So the things that just anyone would come in with, but I'm not going to say, well, your problem is that you were a stripper. So, which happens. It happens so much. I had a poly couple I was working with. They're an open relationship couple. They were swingers. They were in their 70s. And the woman, who is a very highly regarded academic professional in her field, very successful, went to a therapist, and the therapist said, and the couple, they did swinging on the weekends, consensual, they did it as a partnership, it was a non-issue. The therapist said, well, your problem is you're a slut.
Oh.
So this is still happening. This is happening with therapists that are uneducated about these types of lifestyles. So for example, in this situation, a couple can be a swinger. That's something they do together, consensually. Doesn't have to affect the rest of their life. It's something they just do, like a recreational thing. And unless it's a problem for me, when I hear this with a client, it's not a problem. If this is something you do and it's a non-issue, we don't really need to focus about it.
Two people can agree upon it and it works, then it works.
Right. So I work with people that just feel safer with somebody that is not going to stigmatize them for these types of behaviors. Right.
Yeah. That said, I'm curious, these lines of work in the sex worker industry, do you see that does negatively affect their psychology?
It's a really hard question to answer because there's so many types of sex work and so many different types of people. I mean, just like any job.
Let me be specific then. Mm-hmm. Let's say you gave the example of someone, man or woman, who does porn at home, makes their own porn, is their own boss, whatever, and does that. And then the other one would just be a prostitute.
Mm-hmm. But there's so many different types of prostitutes as well. I worked with clients that are, paycheck to paycheck, like they're doing sex work to put food on the table. And then I've worked with clients who make $30,000 to $50,000 a job. Very different lifestyles that these two people are living, both in sex work, both in prostitution, but very, very different.
So are you saying that there are some where the line of work, it may not negatively affect their psychology very much?
I think with any job, there's aspects you can look at. I mean, if somebody has had a trauma and then they're doing sex work, could that be triggering? Of course.
Yeah.
Is that also a job where they have the ability to make a lot of money in a way that they're taking agency over their own body and doing? That's also a benefit. So we can look at every field as having these problematic things and also a lot of benefits.
I see.
Yeah.
But you're kind of what I'm hearing from all of this is kind of removing the judgment. And
right. I'm not going to tell my clients to stop doing what they're doing if this is their choice. Right. I'm not going to say, well, maybe if you got out of doing this work and go work, wherever, that's a judgment. So.
And then you would probably say that you would not make these things illegal, laws against prostitution.
That's also a really big gray area too, because a lot of even sex workers are working for decriminalization, but not legalization, because then that brings another slew of issues.
Regulation,
right.
And so forth.
So, a lot of different schools of thought there. Changing that isn't something I'm necessarily concerned with. I think decriminalization on any consensual crime should happen, because if it's consensually done, that's people's choice and freedom and responsibility to do that. But I have mixed thoughts on what legalization would even look like in our country. So I have a hard time actually viewing that and seeing what that would be.
Kind of balance the decriminalize versus avoiding all the regulation stuff. So wait a minute. I think earlier you suggested that the real moment your life changed is when you got this cat.
It is true. It is true.
Tell me about that.
So my cat is, I get so happy.
While we push pause on the human sexuality prostitute conversation, let's get your cat
These
story.
are all very important topics, and cats are equally important. So I got a cat because I had gone through some health issues, and I read, maybe if you're home more and you're not feeling so great, you might have some feelings of depression, that having an animal would be a good idea. So I thought, no, I'll rescue a cat. And it has changed my life so much. Whenever I'm home alone, I just feel like I have so much companionship. I'm just really involved with my cat.
Wow.
And that makes me sound like a crazy cat lady, but I fully embrace that.
Well, I wasn't going to use the words.
Look,
but
I am. I dress him in costumes. He has an Instagram.
What's he get? Wait.
Oh, yeah.
Why didn't you bring him?
Because he's a cat. He's selfish. He wants to stay home.
Well, he wanted to be on the show.
Yeah, I don't know. He would be the star of the show. You'd be very, very intimidated and threatened by his presence. He's very beautiful.
I'm often intimidated. Like What's his name?
Marquis.
What kind of cat is
He's
Marquis?
a snowshoe Siamese. So he's half Siamese and half white, but he looks like he has a little beauty mark. You can follow him at Marquis de Chat.
Oh my gosh.
King of cats. But he was named after the Marquis de Sade, if you know who that is. He's a writer that wrote very sexualized writing in 1600s, 1700s, way before 50 Shades of Grey. So that's what he's named after.
Your life changed with that cat?
I think the companionship of having an animal and the need to care for something constantly outside of myself and that was dependent on me it feels good, to be able to have that dynamic. So, and I see that with clients I work with too when they get dogs or cats, that they really see a big change. I have a really good friend that got a hamster recently, and that's been a life changer for him, a hamster.
I wish I could have a dog. I travel too much.
But you can share animals. So I did a whole...
Roommates have a dog?
Yeah, you have a dog that lives here. So a familiar animal, studies show that your heart rate will go down, your blood pressure will be more regulated, your physiological response to animals is a familiar animal as well. So it doesn't have to be your dog. You can dog share. So you can FaceTime my cat if you want, if it will help you. But a familiar animal can be helpful. So
I'm just working on a girlfriend. We'll get
Start with a cat.
We'll get
Start
to the
with a
dog
cat.
later. Let me ask you this. I had one more question around the sex worker topic. So when these folks come in to see you, what do you find is the most therapeutic thing that you do? Like listen non-judgmentally? Like what is it that they really need and that they get from you?
I think that is pretty much a big part of it, is listening in a non-judgmental space. And also, many of these people can't share with everybody or don't share with everybody what they do. So here's a space where they can fully just be themselves, and it stays in this room. So maybe they can't tell their family or their partners everything they're doing, or challenges that they have because they fear more criticism. So in this space, they can disclose all of that.
It makes me wonder, the next step when we're talking about, creating a better society. Is the better society one where that is not stigmatized, shamed, all of that stuff?
I mean, I think as a society, if we work towards just being careful and cautious how we stigmatize and shame any population, I think right now, whether it's the political climate or social media, there's all these factors I can hypothesize that contribute to what I feel we're in a very, very rage-filled culture. There's a lot of finger pointing and raging that I see happening all the time. So being really mindful of how we channel our anger and how we judge other people, and oftentimes because we're threatened about what we don't know or what we don't participate in, I think going towards that direction would be extremely helpful.
So maybe even when you're talking politically, you can still kind of express your political beliefs, et cetera, but then not charge it with that anger, shame.
Right. I think that we just see a really big divide right now. I think as a country we're very divided,
Feels that way.
And you see a lot more than any other time frame, in my opinion, of people saying, if you support this, then get off my Facebook, or I don't want to know you, which I didn't hear as much before. I have a friend that has very different political candidate views that I have, but she's a very well-respected professor. We're very close, and we've agreed not to go deep into politics when we're together, but we care very much about each other. But she said all of her other friendships have judged her, and she's felt very isolated and ostracized from that. So I think that's a problem, that we criticize and shame other people for these things and rage at them and point fingers, when I think we need a little bit more empathy with people that we know.
I swear, I think a lot of it is just that there are these bots and these algorithms and these things that just heighten this online.
Which is why we need to get offline a little bit.
Yeah!
Or make a cat account and have your cat only follow cats, and let me tell you, that changes everything. So going back, I know that sounds crazy, cat lady, but let me give you my
again, like I didn't say those words.
You didn't have to.
I am genuinely happy for you that your cat makes you happier.
It does, but I do work with my clients on changing how they engage in social media. So I don't tell them specifically to make a cat account. That would be me projecting my own theories on
this
people.
This worked for me, although you could probably become an internet sensation, with your own account, teaching people how to. This could be huge.
Mm-hmm. Well, my cat's account didn't really take off, but that's okay.
Not yet.
Nah, it's not going to happen.
If you would have brought him on the show, though.
Maybe. But I do talk to clients about changing what they follow, what they engage in, and when you make it more positive or related to things you actually care about. So instead of following accounts that are people you compare yourself to, or information that causes you to feel angry and rage-filled. For example, I like to follow a lot of artists and things that motivate me instead of trigger my anger, that trigger me to make positive change in the world.
Yeah, just positive influences.
Yeah, and not woo-wooey, so positive all the time, like realistically positive. Things that you actually can feel and agree with and take action with. So, but when I log into my cat's account, I just look at other cats and dogs, and honestly, it makes me happy.
And you're happy.
Right. Yeah, if I want to just, these are
kittens.
Adorable pics. Oh, so adorable.
Yeah.
But I no longer follow things that trigger me to feel comparative or negative or rageful. But I talk to clients about doing, especially younger clients that I have, because it's so much in the culture. When I say younger, I say like under 35. It's so in that culture to do that. And with people older than that, you see that with excessive exposure to newspapers and Fox News and CNN. When you're sitting in front of the TV for hours and just sucked into this negativity, it's going to affect you. So one way you can work on that is making a cat account, but there's many other methods to approach that.
So what I'm curious about, you talk, one of the things that I'm hearing from you is this kind of work not only with patients and clients, but you worked with somebody who kind of used human sexuality, sex therapy as a platform and a way to advocate for social change, make a better world. What are a few of the top hitters where if you were like, if I could just make this world better when it comes to relationship sex, like for men and women, what's that message? What are those
it's
top
so simple.
Yes.
It's so simple. It's like open and honest communication, making time for intimacy and closeness, and prioritizing intimacy and closeness. And that doesn't mean PIV sex. Do you know PIV? Do you know what that
Penis and vagina?
Yes. Good work. I was at USC this weekend.
Are you gonna leave me
Yeah.
hanging?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You got all excited about that.
Like,
Give me some nugs, girl. Yeah, you hit it. That's good. Do you know what? Okay. Keep going.
That's good. So I often find that people don't know what that means. So when I say penis and vagina sex or PIV sex, I'm referring to the automatic assumption that is heteronormative in our culture, that we assume that sex means a penis goes in a vagina and a man ejaculates, typically a man. And that's not sex. That is one of many types of sex that you can have. But intimacy might be touching, holding, kissing, cuddling. Could be orgasmic, could not be. It's not required. But prioritizing intimacy and relationship is really important. And we don't do that a lot as a culture.
And when you do this, maybe taking the focus off of orgasm and climax, all this stuff, when you switch it to these other things that you're talking about, how does that benefit the relationship?
Prioritizing intimacy and closeness. So when we're on this mission for orgasm, we're not actually connecting with our partner. We're really focused on this one thing rather than focused on connection. So focusing on connection and relationship will further build attachment and attunement, which are the things that keep relationships together.
Okay, we need to unpack all of that.
Yeah.
So I heard a lot of words: attachment and attunement. I feel like I understand attachment. What is attunement?
Attunement is being on the same wavelength, pretty much, being on the same page. So when you're prioritizing each other and you're communicating, making eye contact, being intimate, you can be more attuned or kind of tuned into your partner.
Wavelength. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And attachment is being attached as a partnership, but it's also referring to your own attachment styles.
Right.
Have you read Attached?
I haven't read Attached. Attachment styles, you mean like avoidant and
Anxious, secure.
Anxious, avoidant, and then,
These are studies that started in the 60s, I believe, with John Bowlby. And these research studies then led to a book that was written 10, 20 years ago called Attached. And I would say if I give anybody my #1 relationship book to read on relationship dynamics, I would say read Attached.
Attached by, you said John Bowlby?
He was the original researcher on the studies. I don't know the author's name off the top of my head.
Okay, so the book is Attached.
It's Attached. It's a really well-known, highly acclaimed book on relationship dynamics. So for you to identify your own attachment style, your partner's, or maybe based on your own attachment style, you can figure out what kind of partner attachment style would work best for you. But attachment is a very big component in how relationships bond, connect, and how they eventually succeed or do not succeed.
I totally agree. Been aware of this attachment style thing. It's like oil and water.
Yeah.
Like I know my attachment style. I'm a little bit avoidant, and if it's like an anxious person, like
That'll be triggering for you. You'll shut down more.
yeah. Well, they're needy though.
Well, you feel that they're needy because you're more avoidant. And the person might come across needy to somebody who needs more of their own space. So finding someone else who's avoidant or finding somebody that's secure. Secure partners are typically going to be the best option for everybody. It's about 50% of the population.
Secure partners are 50%. I thought they were unicorns.
No, they're 50%, but typically they're in relationships.
Oh,
and they seek relationships.
They're unavailable.
Yeah,
now that makes sense.
So the dating pool, like let's say you go on a dating app, a lot of the people are not going to be secured because of secure attachment because typically they're in relationship. So people that usually get put back in the dating pool
let's
are
like make
marginalized.
this a empowering belief instead of all of the secure attached good ones that are the only ones you're going to really have a shot with are unavailable right now.
Well, that's you.
Let's do a different one.
So let's reframe that statement a little bit. So
Yes.
you're saying all the good ones. So being with a secure person typically might be less triggering for some people. They can actually help to an extent an avoidant or anxious person kind of get back on track a little bit. But however, that doesn't make them the good one. So if you decide to fall in love or decide to engage with somebody that's anxious and you notice you're being triggered, all that's going to require is that the two of you have check-ins, more communication, and that you're aware of.
So it's possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like a quarter of the
Let's
population.
let's do this again.
Okay.
Check-ins. What's that look like? How frequently? Let's give a
Depending
playbook
on the
for
relationship,
this.
I usually have clients that are, navigating relationship issues, check in, maybe let's say once a week.
And the
that's
check-in looks like what? What do you say?
You sit down, how are you feeling? Anything you want to bring up? This is the time to voice some things. I've been feeling this way. So just a space to have those conversations. Typically people don't do that. I give clients homework to do that. Couples therapy can function as that. So making sure you're checking in with one another and saying, you know what, I noticed that when you text me 20 times a day, I find myself feeling less likely to respond because of my own attachment stuff that I have, my own attachment style. I'm wondering if maybe we can manage how much text communication we have because of that. So if you were dating an anxious person that was exhibiting these types of behaviors, that's what you would do. And you see if there's an impact on that.
Yeah. Where were we? Okay, we were talking about different attachment styles, and you were listing things to do to keep that relationship on. One being like a weekly check-in. What else?
Being aware of attachment styles, let's spread this out to all relationship issues that come up. Educate yourself about relationship dynamics, and that's understanding attachment style, personality traits and styles, understanding your own history of trauma, looking at your values. The reality is opposites do not attract. Birds of a feather do flock together. That saying is more...
In what ways? Which values?
Values.
Names the one that matter.
They all matter, but if you have different values and core beliefs than your partner, there's going to be some tension there. We are attracted as human beings to people and things that match with our value systems.
Yeah.
So there's a really great book by the Gottman Institute that came out this year that I recommend to clients called 8 Great Dates.
I think I saw that on your Instagram.
John Gottman, yeah.
I screenshotted it. I was
Yeah,
like, oh, I'm
I
gonna
like
look
putting
at this.
up book recommendations. I'm a bibliophile. I'm always reading. So
And I'm sorry, that book was, let's say that again.
that book is 8 Great Dates.
The Gottman Institute, 8 Great Dates.
So,
and I saw it was like different topics for each date to
right.
talk about.
So Gottman is one of the best relationship therapist researchers. John Gottman wrote, I think it's the 8 principles of how to make a marriage last. But let's take out the word marriage, any relationship. So I don't want to make that specific to people who've chosen to enter into marriage.
Oh.
No, I mean, that's a choice. That's a choice to have a legal binding contract. We can be in committed long-term relationships and have very similar dynamics than a marriage.
Let me push pause for 1 second because I've been wanting to ask this question all the time. What do you think about this open relationship business?
I think it's more sensationalized now, but I have clients I think it's very possible when both people are extremely honest and they're on the same page. Clients I see that are in open relationships typically have already been doing it for a long time, and it typically almost always works out with the people I work with. Now, somebody saying, I want to open up, that might not go well. So the people I work with are already very seasoned poly people, and they're people that have relationship contracts. They've been through it. They know the lingo, the language. They have a support system. Just anybody opening up, there's a lot of challenges there. So that's just not, it's not going to be something for everybody.
Yeah.
And
Some people it can.
I think there's a lot of schools of thought that are like open relationships are always better. Monogamy is something that isn't natural. I don't agree with that at all. I think that it's a choice. And if 2 people are choosing it and they're engaging in it and it works for them, I think that's awesome.
What do you think about this biological tendency toward not being monogamous?
I think that's an opinion that certain people are trying to push based on their own lives.
You don't agree with that?
I don't agree with either side. I don't agree with it being black and white. I feel like we have natural tendencies to attach to relationships, and we feel jealousy for a reason. It dates back a long time to human evolution. Mm-hmm. I also feel it's very possible to love and engage with multiple people. Mm-hmm. So I think that both are very possible, and everybody's going to find out what works for them based on their own values, beliefs, history, traumas, desires, end goal. So I see many clients I work with in open relationships honestly, most of my open relationship couples that I work with are much easier to work with than my monogamous couples that I see.
In what way?
It's more likely that my monogamous couples are louder, argue more aggressively that I see in my practice. Yeah. And then the couples I have that are already in established open relationships come in talking about compersion, communication.
Compersion? I've never heard that word.
Compersion is the experience that you feel joy for your partner's pleasure. So if you're in an open relationship, the goal is that when your partner has a great date with somebody else, that you feel so happy for them.
Oh, I'm happy for you.
You had a great experience.
Compersion.
Yeah, compersion.
I feel compersion for you.
Yeah. Okay. So, but they know the language already. So they come in and they might want to reestablish boundaries that they've already gone through. Whereas a lot of monogamous couples I work with, they come to me because there's been a very big betrayal, or they have different values, or they're fighting very aggressively. So it's just a different type of problems that I see from my monogamous and my non-monogamous clients that come to me specifically. But that's not saying that every open relationship is going to be that way either. I've also seen people try to open up and end up closing because it's not working for them.
Didn't work.
So it's not black and white. It's not, we're meant to be non-monogamous. Everyone should try opening up. That's the way to go.
Yeah.
It's different per person. If it's something you want to try, I would say do a lot of research, talk to a lot of people, join support groups, see a therapist, get as much support if you want to do that type of behavior and you have not done that before. But I definitely have seen it work out quite well for people I work with. Yeah. But they have to be really dedicated to make it work. And it's not as exciting as one might believe either.
Yeah, I think it's kind of idealized as one solution to a problem of sexual variety.
I think that could be one potential benefit, but that's definitely not what typically happens. I'll tell you that most people that are in open relationships, even with 2 partners, scheduling is such a difficult task. scheduling 2 partners and a job and maybe a family and your own relaxing time. Oh my gosh.
I'm just like laughing.
It
Yo,
is so
kids,
much
like
work.
mom's gonna be gone on Thursday. I'll take you on Thursday. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. Well, a lot of poly couples that have families where there are kids involved do actually babysit. Like the secondary partner might babysit when the primary partners go out on a date, which can actually be quite helpful. It doesn't always work out that
can't
way.
imagine, like, how do you explain that to the kids? Whatever. I don't want to talk about it.
That's a whole other thing.
It's a whole
but
other
yeah,
thing.
it
I
actually
wanna...
it can work out well. So let's work on like destigmatizing that in our culture. But it also is not for everybody.
Yeah.
So for people that choose to do it, if they do it ethically, it can go very well.
Ethical.
But that's ethical dating,
huh?
ethical non-monogamy. Yeah.
Okay, so you were giving some good general relationship recommendations, including you. I keep remember check-in, and then I forget everything else because you say good things.
Okay, so education is so important. So understanding,
education, awareness,
and that could be reading credible books about relationships, emphasizing credible.
Totally.
Also, seeing a therapist. Couples therapy. You don't have to have a problem to see a therapist if you want to just get education on what's normative and healthy and how to just understand your own values. Seeing a therapist can be very helpful for that. Being part of a healthy community of people that have a good connection with one another can be really great to view other healthy relationships. So there's many things you can do to educate yourself about relationship styles, dynamics, values, engagement. Another thing is having check-ins, having intentional check-ins and intentional intimacy. I know sometimes people...
Intentional intimacy.
Intentional?
What is that, like planned sex?
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, Thursday at 8.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times we think that it should be romantic and spontaneous all the time, and that's great if it can be that way. But the reality is when you're in a relationship on an ongoing basis with 2 people with their own stuff going on, sometimes, or a lot of the times, you're not going to match up and want to have sex at the same time, in the same way, for the same amount of time, and do the same kinky thing. Maybe one day somebody wants to have vanilla, monogamous, missionary sex, but the other person was really hoping to, tie the person from the ceiling or something. So even if you generally are similar, you're not always going to want the same thing at the same time.
Babe, it's the second Wednesday.
Right. It's our bondage day.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's bondage day.
Why not?
Oh my God, you call it bondage day too?
So yeah, that would be a commonality. But intentional intimacy is actually something that's very helpful for people that have like trauma or reactivity during sex. So knowing when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen can help that. But also when you get into a busy life, for example, clients I work with that have children or have very busy work schedules, they're like, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so tired, the kids. You sometimes have to plan intimacy. And we take the spontaneity out of it, but we can still connect and we can still feel good and feel pleasure.
It makes sense. I don't know that I really heard of that before, but it makes sense.
Intentional intimacy. It's one of many things you can do. But if you're finding that there's not a sexual frequency matchup, planning something is important.
Let me get a little philosophical on you here. What is intimacy?
I would say closeness. So intimacy doesn't necessarily have to include sex or sexual activity.
Yeah.
So intimacy, you can be intimate with a friend, you can be intimate with other people in your life. Doesn't mean that it has to be sexualized or romantic. So romance and intimacy can be very different.
Yeah.
I feel very intimately close with some of my close friends. Doesn't mean that I've been naked with them or that I've been sexual with them. Intimacy is just closeness, which is important that we have that with people, because that's, as animals, we crave closeness and relationship. And that doesn't necessarily mean monogamous romantic relationship, but we as human beings look for groups of people, we look for a tribe.
It's a fascinating thing, you know, like to be known and know someone and that kind of intimacy. I think it's really interesting. I want to talk about your book for a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to grab the New Sex Bible for Women, which is the complete guide to sexual self-awareness, and there's that word again, intimacy. The complete guide, complete? It's ambitious. Complete guide to sexual self-awareness and intimacy. Can I read this as a man and learn some things?
Absolutely.
I'm going to show that right there. Bam. And I'm going to show that right there. That's right. We got Dr. Amie Harwick.
So it covers a lot of topics. It's really just all the basics. The publishing company I work with wanted to do something that was more marketable. So it's definitely not a book for queer relationships. It's definitely a more heteronormative book.
Heteronormative.
Yeah, I tried to get them to go a little outside that, but that was more the publishing company's choice. But it has pretty much a lot of resources for all the other things. So if you were interested in learning about your body, sexual self-esteem, oral sex, anal sex, whatever it is, it gives you some information and then some resources of where to go if you want to learn more.
Anal sex, chapter 8. Chapter 9, oral sex, be great at giving it and getting it. What's that about?
Being mindful while you give and receive oral sex. So if you're only doing it for a partner, probably not the most enjoyable for you, but being in the moment. A lot of what I talk about in there is mindfulness, like being mindful while being sexual.
And
it's very important.
Explain that.
Being in the moment. So being in the moment and being aware of your own body and psychological experience while you're with a partner.
And not thinking of other things. And
how do I
being
perform?
elsewhere.
Is this person enjoying this? Am I going to reach orgasm? That's not being mindful. But
if people do that, how do you get them out of it?
Working on mindfulness outside of the bedroom. So even whether it's in our sessions or giving them homework about mindfulness, meditation, body awareness.
It's that mindfulness thing.
It's that mindfulness thing.
Inside and outside of the bedroom.
Yeah.
Chapter 1, your body, your temple. Chapter 2, loving your sexual lifespan. What does that mean?
The lifespan of how we age and change and how that impacts our intimacy and sexuality.
Oh, I see, with age. Chapter 3, boosting your sexual self-esteem. Chapter 4, the brain, your most powerful sex organ. I'm going to read this. Do you have any quick pointers for straight men to help understand and be better in relationships sexually with women?
I would say...
What comes to mind?
I would say increasing education and awareness. Usually heterosexual men that I work with are the population that's least likely to have read credible books about sexual health and sexual identities. So yeah, I would say read some books, join a book club, go to a meetup, go to a therapist that's sex positive. So it doesn't have to be a sex therapist, but a therapist that is sex positive, which means believing that anything you do in a consensual, safe way is ultimately okay.
Anything you do in a consensual, safe way is okay. Sex positive. Yeah, that sex isn't bad. Yeah. That anything is good and natural if it's consensual, and I wouldn't even say safe, because that's consensual.
Yeah, I would say that even safety is a choice in what people want to engage in. There's a lot of sexual practices that maybe wouldn't be considered necessarily the safest or might be more risky, but if they're two consensual people doing those things, that's okay.
Dr. Harwick, this has been great.
Yeah.
It's been fun to dive into this stuff.
Thanks for listening to me talk about my cat and also sexuality.
This has been a great interview. I think it's gonna reach and touch a lot of folks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Is there anything else you wanted to say as we wrap up?
I think we're good.
What was your cat's name again?
Marky.
Meow. So it's our tradition here to have the guest look at that camera and close the show.
And in what way?
Any kind of salutation of.
Okay. What's the name of the show?
Life Can Change in a Moment.
Life Can Change in a Moment. Okay. Are you ready? Want me to just go for it? Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me on Life Can Change in a Moment. Tune in next time when I won't be here and they won't be talking about cats.
You don't know that for sure. Thanks for watching the show. Please subscribe to this. If you know anybody that's got a great story, reach out to me on social media. Check out the show notes online at drlarry.com, and we will see you next time. Maybe we will talk about
A lot of times it's out of our control. The things that we worry about, even unconsciously, it's like you acknowledge, okay, you know what, have I done everything that I can do about that particular situation? Yes? That's it. There's nothing more I can do about it.
Where is this intuition again?
Right here.
Localize it.
Right here.
Right.